What's going on, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest installment of the Detroit News Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Varsity Ford of Ann Arbor. And as always, I'm your host, Pistons beat writer at the Detroit News, Coty M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on all your social media platforms at Coty Davis _24, along with my co-hosts.
Yeah, hi guys, it's Tarohn Finley. I appreciate you having me again, Cody. Follow me on all platforms at Tarohn Finley, TarohnFinley. I'm ready to talk Pistons.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think everyone is excited to talk Pistons as of right now because on Monday, the Pistons opened their preseason schedule with a 128-112 victory over the Memphis Grizzlies. And look, I feel like, this is part of the reason why I kind of hate preseason, but I love it at the same time. I hate it because, especially the first preseason game, I think people believe that you shouldn't buy into the stock, the excitement that you've seen. If you see something good, it's like, well, it's the first preseason game, especially considering if it comes against a team like the Memphis Grizzlies, who were without Ja Morant, who were without Jaren Jackson Jr., and who were without a lot of their key players. The Pistons, if we keep it in the buck, they was playing against the Grizzlies, let's say C team. I don't want to disrespect nobody, but at the end of the day, JB Bickerstaff did roll out his starting five. We got an idea of what the rotation could look like going into the regular season, and the Memphis Grizzlies didn't do that. However, this is why I hate preseason, because when you speak on the good, it's the first preseason game. It's not going to be like that in the regular season. When you speak on the bad, it's the first preseason game. They got time to fix it. It's not going to be like that in the regular season. You can't win. However, that's what the Detroit Pistons did in Memphis. And look, we got a lot to get into in this first preseason game. Of course, I want to talk about, Chaz Lanier. I want to talk about the two-way prospects who look good. In the second segment, we got to talk about Cade, because I don't care if it was the first preseason game or game 7 of the NBA Finals. Cade Cunningham balled out in the 20 minutes that he played. We're going to get into that, but we're going to open up this latest installment of the Detroit News Basketball Podcast looking at how the second quarter represent how JB Bickerstaff wants the Pistons to play for this upcoming season. Now, before we talk about the second quarter, we got to talk about how bad and how ugly that first quarter looked. And I don't know if it was because it was the first preseason game or just due to the fact that, the Pistons, in a sense, they thought that they can play down to the level of their competition. As I just mentioned, a lot of the Grizzlies' main players were not playing. So the Pistons, they came out in a sense and kind of lollygag. And after the end of the first quarter, they was down 42-24, and they looked awful. They had 9 turnovers in the first quarter. They were shooting 3 of 10 from behind the arc. In the Memphis Grizzlies, they had the opposite problem. They only had 1 turnover, and they were shooting 9 from 11 from behind the arc. And I believe they
Lights
started
out.
the game shooting 7 for 7 or 8 for 8 from behind the arc. What were some of your concerns that you saw in that first quarter?
Yeah, I think it was a feeling out process. I think that Cade and Jaden Ivey were trying to get used to playing with each other again. It just seemed
Hmm.
like just kind of taking their turns rather than them just, playing with that chemistry that we saw at the early part of last year. So I think that was one of the big issues. And I think that with Jalen Duren not playing, and then them inserting Isaiah Stewart, who, as we talked about last week, is the longest tenured Piston on the team. It was just a little bit of difference as far as just like having that vertical lob threat. We did see Stewart
Hmm.
have a couple dunks and things like that, but I just think adding a new partner to the rotation and then having someone that is, supposed to come off the bench with the second unit. I just think that those two pieces just kind of threw the rhythm of the game off. And I think the IVK thing is something I'm going to be watching early in the season, because I think that is going to be a work in progress. But, it improved as, the second quarter went on and late in the first half.
I'm glad that you mentioned Jalen Duren. That's something I had forgot to mention, but Jalen Duren did not play in this game due to hamstring tightness. However, it's not something to be concerned about. He is listed as day to day moving forward. So, of course, without a shadow of a doubt, we're definitely going to see him before the preseason is over. Don't know about his status on Thursday. We'll talk to JB Bickerstaff later on, and I'm pretty sure he'll give some type of update. But I 100% agree with you with everything that you just said in terms of the concerns that you saw in the first quarter. However, the Pistons, man, they flipped the switch in the second quarter and they ended up outscoring the Memphis Grizzlies 50-22. Once again, I understand it's preseason. Once again, I understand that it's the first preseason game. But what you cannot do is overlook the fact that the Pistons or any team in the association can put together a quarter where they explode for 50 points. And that's going to be very big. And part of the reason why I love that is the fact that majority of the success that the Pistons had in the second quarter all came due to the fact that they were able to pick up the intensity and the production on the defensive side of the ball. And that was very telling to me because last week I had an opportunity to ask Coach JB Bickerstaff because throughout even before the start of media day, we heard this team talk a lot about conditioning. We heard this team talk a lot about the athleticism and the explosive that they have on this team, which got me thinking, do the Pistons want to pick up the tempo and have more of an explosive offense for this upcoming season? And rightfully so because they have the pieces. And I had an opportunity to ask Coach JB Bickerstaff last week in training camp about, how does he want this team to play in terms of picking up the pace or simply having more of an explosive offensive power game?
I think, it's the way you go about it, right? There's a way that you can defend and be explosive, and that's what we aim to do. We're not here to just concede baskets so that you get into this up and down game. What we want to do is make sure that our identity is on the defensive end. And then you can go from a great defensive team to an explosive offensive team.
Everything that Coach JB Bickerstaff said in that clip that I just played for you guys is exactly what we saw the Pistons do in the second quarter. This was a team that forced the Memphis Grizzlies into committing 10 turnovers. And with those 10 turnovers, they was able to capitalize with 18 fast break points compared to the 2 that they had in the first quarter. And not only that, you're looking at a situation where the Pistons were also able to get things going with their half-court offense, and they looked even better shooting from behind the arc as well, shooting 5 or 7 during that quarter. Everything that you wanted to see from the Pistons in terms of them using their athleticism, using their defense, and just being an explosive team on the offensive end, because once again, they have the pieces to do so. And this was also without Jalen Duren, who was one of their most explosive players ever. That second quarter alone, regardless of who was on the court for the Memphis Grizzlies, regardless of who wasn't in for the Pistons or whatever the case might be, that second quarter was a testament of what Coach JB Bickerstaff want this team to do moving forward for this upcoming season.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Coty, you were spot on because that was something that I was really looking for after the first podcast, see how their defensive intensity picked up and see how that led to easy transition baskets, and just see if their overall pace just got a lot faster as the season went on. But it seemed like that was something they were doing from preseason game 1, so that was just something that I was looking out for. But I think one of the biggest things that I liked about the second quarter was just the lineup. I noticed that JB Bickerstaff was just throwing so many lineups out there just throughout this game and just trying things. So one of the things that I liked about it was we see more Ausar playing the point guard. And I think what's good about that is just that everyone in that lineup that I saw, and I'm talking about guys like Karis LeVert, Ausar, Duncan Robinson, and they had Ron Holland at the 4. It's just they're all switchable wing defenders, so that's going to help on the defensive end, especially with Ausar picking up. And I think that we seen Sasser doing that earlier because he was the first backup point guard off the bench. But I think Ausar just gives that size that Sasser doesn't have, and he is used to handling the ball, maybe, more previously, but we have seen him do it at the NBA level as well. And just that their ball movement, just overall, that everyone on the team just seems like they're willing to make that extra pass, which leads to, open threes, which leads to, fast break points because anyone can, grab the ball off a rebound and take it up and try to get a transition basket. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I liked, was just that lineup versatility and just that unselfishness and that willingness to pass and lead to these easy baskets off defense like you were talking about.
And I love the fact that you talked about Asar Thompson, because I do believe, his ability to, get the ball off the glass and push it is part of the reason why the Pistons were able to convert their defense into offense, especially, considering the fact, as I just mentioned, they were able to get 18 fast break points in that second quarter. I believe Asar Thompson played, I think I want to call him as, somewhat of a secondary ball handler playing next to K. I believe, JB ran that lineup for about a good 4 to 5 minutes. And, the tone that Asar Thompson was able to establish with the ball in his hand is part of the reason why not only did they look good in that second quarter, but also throughout the rest of the game. And of course, Asar Thompson putting the ball in his hands is something that this team definitely wants to utilize moving forward. However, it doesn't matter who has the ball in their hands. Cade Cunningham balled out in that first preseason game, so we're going to talk about that on the opposite side of this break, because, boy, Lord have mercy.
For 44 years, Varsity Ford in Ann Arbor has been more than just a dealership. We're a family, proudly serving yours. As one of the top volume Ford dealers in the world, we're proof that when you treat people right, they come back, generation after generation. And now we make it easier than ever with complimentary pickup and delivery for both sales and service, so you can buy or service your Ford without leaving home. Varsity Ford, driven by family, built on tradition.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to this latest installment of the Detroit News Basketball Podcast. Once again, and I know I'm going to say this a lot throughout the show, because I feel like I need to keep putting this disclaimer out here, because it's the first preseason game. But at the end of the day, you cannot look over the fact that Cade Cunningham was balling out in this game. And I think if this was a regular season game, we might have been on this show talking about the fact that Cade probably had about 40, 45 points, because he looked so good. He only played 20 minutes. All of that came in the first half. And just listen to the stat line. 20 points. Shot 8 for 11 from the field, 2 or 3 from behind the arc, 4 assists, 3 rebounds, and 2 steals. Before I give my take on what I saw from Cade, which, by the way, he scored 11 points in that second quarter, what were some of the things that stood out to you about Cade in his performance? Once again, 20 minutes and was able to do all that damage.
Yeah, my biggest thoughts, and I had wrote this down after seeing it last night, is Cade might be the best horse player in the NBA, just because just everything he was doing out there. Like, he had a mid-range, he had floaters, spot up threes, step backs, layups into and ones, and then he saved his toughest basket.
Which was nasty.
It was real nasty off the reverse layup off the alley-oop from Tobias Harris. So I just think that he can really do everything on the court. And we didn't even mention his 4 assists, which all came, from just trying to get his team involved, but not forcing it. It just seems like he has just an unreal level of control at this age. So he's just, looking for a shot if it's there. If it's not, he's always willing to make that, outlet pass, or just, I think he had an assist to Duncan Robinson. He was on the corner, I believe, and then he just, quickly got it to him because he seen that he was wide open. And this is things like that he just does naturally. So I just think his scoring and his vision just stand out. But Coty, how did Cade play to you? I know you probably have a lot of thoughts about what he did out there.
I mean, you look, Cade played like Cade, but he played like a better version of Cade. And what I mean by that is, There was one thing that I was looking for in terms of Cade performance in this game. And that was his ability to use his body to just finish better at the rim. And that's something that I kind of honed in on because throughout the playoffs, and I believe it was more so because we all know come playoffs, the intensity, the physicality of the game, everything elevates. And throughout the playoffs, especially that last press conference that we had, we asking K, what are some of the things that you want to get better at? What are some of the things that, you want to work on throughout the offseason? Even when we had an opportunity to talk to Trajan Langdon and Coach JB Bickerstaff throughout the offseason or whatever the case might be, anytime there was a topic of Cade Cunningham's, improvement, they always talked about him and even himself finishing at the rim better, and having and improving his body and conditioning in order to meet that standard. And when I watched him in Monday's night game against the Grizzlies, when I watched him, especially in that second quarter, him scoring in a variety of ways, but his ability, to take the contact, his ability to finish better around the rim, his ability to look more athletic, more explosive, to have those, phenomenal plays that we saw him catching the alley reverse layup from Tobias Harris. All of that kind of stems to what he has been talking about, and that was literally working on his conditioning, working on his body, having an opportunity to finish better at the rim. And look, once again, first preseason game, I understand Jaren Jackson Jr., wasn't out there, and I understand, taking the hit from, somebody on the Memphis Grizzlies bench is going to be different from when you take that same hit from Jaren Jackson Jr. However, it's the fact that he just showed improvement in that part of his game alone gives me confidence that, look, the all NBA third team all-star guard that we saw last year is definitely going to take another step forward for this upcoming season. And Kay understands that in order for this team not to show any type of regression, in order for him to not show any type of stagnation or regression within his game alone, he understands that a lot of the Pistons' success, and even, of course, majority of his success alone on an individual level, stems from him putting in the work throughout this whole entire offseason. And I think that's what we saw the most in Monday's night game. And it's not just me, conditioning, improving his body, finishing at the rim is something that Cade Cunningham talked about on media day as well.
I think definitely, cementing ourselves at the top of the East is where that all starts. Winning games at the highest level, putting ourselves at the top of the league as far as record and all that stuff. That's super important. And me just, I think to get that, me just sharpening myself, my decision making, my conditioning, like we spoke about, all those things I think could add, possessions to us and add wins. You know what I mean? So, just staying locked in, staying focused on what's to come, and I think we put ourselves in a great position. I put myself in a great position to have a great year.
Yeah, Cody, I think this is going to be a big season for Cade. You talked about that third team NBA that he got last year. I think that's just his floor, honestly, as long as he can stay healthy. And I just really liked about the game against the Grizzlies. It seems like he took it personally that they were down that much and, wanted to play majority of that second quarter. And, just because he probably knew he wasn't going to play in the second half, and just do as much as he could to will the team to a win, whether that was, like we talked about earlier, the passing, or whether that was just creating his own shot. So I think that Cade continues to have a dominant performance this year and continues to solidify itself as one of the top point guards, or just top players in the league. I don't want to even just limit it to a position, just because of everything he can do, whether, that is like the assist, scoring, even rebounds. He's able to get that. My only nitpick was he did have 4 early fouls. So I don't know. I would have to watch the game back to see if that was, just him taking more chances because it was a preseason game. He probably knew he wasn't going to play the second half, or was that just lack of discipline. That's something that I probably will have to look out for, probably my second go around watching it. But other than that, you really can't nitpick a performance like that, especially just it being the first half.
But the best part about that game against the Grizzlies is the fact that Cade Cunningham wasn't the only standout from that game. So on the other side of the break, we're gonna highlight some other performances, some other players who caught our eye, especially rookie Chaz Lanier. I was a little bit impressed by him, and I also have a theory that might change the trajectory of this team, if not this year, maybe next year, in terms of Chaz Lanier.
This is what your backyard was meant to feel like. A more human approach for the human experience. Live out your vision, your dreams, and your next stage of outdoor luxury living solutions from Skyview. Live out today at skyviewdetroit.com.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this latest installment of the Detroit News Basketball Podcast. Look, at the end of the day, the Pistons looked, outside of the first quarter, really good in their first preseason game, and I think there's a lot of positive and some negatives that you could take away as well. I think the biggest negative for me was the fact that they still seem like they have an issue with turnovers. I mentioned earlier in the show that in the first quarter, when they looked just god awful, they had 9 turnovers, but they finished the game with 22. In order for this team to not only, I think, at worst replicate last year's success, but take that next step and get better, you're looking at a situation where this team cannot turn the ball over, especially considering someone like Cade, who, basically since he entered this league as a first round pick in 2021, turnovers has always been an issue for Cade. And yes, I understand that a lot of that has to do with the fact that his usage rating has always been high. And that's something that we've seen with a lot of players in terms of their usage rating being high. I remember in the prime of watching James Harden in Houston, I mean, he used to turn the ball over about 5.5 times a game, but his usage rating was higher than Cade. The same thing with Russell Westbrook in Oklahoma City after KD left. I think that comes with it. However, you want to see Cade, and not just Cade. Jaden Ivey had 3 turnovers. Ron Holland, a guy who I've raved about a lot throughout this whole entire summer league, his ability to go through his reads and progression with the game slowing down. He had 3 turnovers. It's just like this team is such a turnover prone team to the point. Sometimes I kind of feel like that could be a detriment on whether or not we're going to see progression or regression.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that just speaks to the youth of the team, outside of Tobias Harris. A lot of guys are, a little old. I mean, a lot younger than, the typical age. And I'm going to talk about a little bit of that age as we, get to talk about more topics and things like that. But I think another thing that stood out to me for improvement was just the unnecessary fouls. Like I talked about Cade's 4 fouls. I seen few from Ron Holland, or one in particular I seen was just kind of unnecessary. But I think as they continue to mature, these things are only going to improve. And I think that JB Bickerstaff just seems like that coach where he's preaching defense and turning that into offense and things like that. I don't know if you caught the clip about JB Bickerstaff or Karis LeVert talking about how JB Bickerstaff emphasized defense in his career. And like up to that point, he was mainly just an offensive player. So I think that as time goes on, these turnovers and unnecessary fouls are going to go down, especially later on into the season.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, when you take a look at, the turnovers that Jaden Ivey had. This is, a guy that has not played in 9.5 months. And I know he didn't look as good as we all, wanted him to. But it's just the reality of the situation. It's going to take Jaden Ivey some time. I was, impressed by the way he looked because, once again, 9.5 month layoff, and to see him go out there in the second quarter and kind of showcase the speed and the explosive that we are used to seeing from him, especially at the end of the second quarter. We had an opportunity to convert an and one layup as time expired. I think that was really good for Jaden Ivey, and it's going to take him some time, but just to see him back out there on the floor, on the court with his teammates celebrating him and everything else in between was really good. But I know you wanted to touch on the youth youth of this team. And the number one guy that I was most impressed by was Chaz Lanier. And look, I am really big on a lot of the Pistons younger guys, especially the two-way guys, Dennis Jenkins, Tolu Smith. Both of those guys look really, really good in this preseason game. Bobby Clintman, I still want to see more from him. I think he's still trying to find his way. It's unfortunate that I feel like he should be a little bit further on in his development. However, last training camp in his rookie season, he suffered a calf contusion, and I kind of feel like that kind of hindered his development. So it still seemed like he's still trying to find his way. But Tolu Smith, 11 points, 11 rebounds. The only person on the team, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, had an opportunity to have a double-double, and he had an opportunity to, do so playing 12 minutes. Same thing with Dennis Jenkins. I was really impressed by him. He showcased his ability rather in the G League, rather in the Summer League, his ability to not only score, but to, keep the ball, keep the offense afloat with 6 assists. I love the way Dennis Jenkins plays. However, the biggest guy, the youngest guy that I was most impressed by was Chaz Lanier. This young man made his NBA preseason debut and looked very good. Scored 11 points, shooting 3 of 5 from behind the arc. And let me just say this. I think Chaz is going to be the difference maker in whether or not Marcus Sasser be a long-term fit with this team. And the reason why I say that, now before everybody start losing their stuff and calling me crazy and stuff, I'm not looking at it from this year. I'm looking at it in terms of what the makeup of this team could look like next year. And I say that because Sasser came into this league, undersized guard, and it seemed like, look, his natural ability, from what I was able to see, covering him in his freshman season at Houston, at the University of Houston, and literally watching his college career progress, watching his first season from afar in Detroit, and watching him last year, it seemed like Sasser is at his best when he has an opportunity to be more so of an off-ball guard. And when he has the ball in his hands, he seemed like he's at his best when he's more so of the scoring guard. Not saying that he can't go out there and facilitate and create players for others, but it seemed like when he's trying to fit into this quote-unquote point guard mode, that is where we start to see him struggle a little bit, at least through his first 2 seasons. That is when we see him, kind of go from playing 26 minutes to a DNP, from a DNP to 11 minutes to another DNP to 30 minutes. We all know that his rotation, especially with Coach J.B. Bickerstaff as of right now, is up and down. However, with Chaz Lanier, I kind of feel like that he is the guy that is going to be that off-ball scoring guard, especially given his ability to shoot the basketball. I feel like he is going to be that off-ball scoring guard that the Pistons have been, kind of yearning for in a sense. And if he gets an opportunity to be that off-ball scoring guard, which means that could possibly put Marcus Sasser in a situation where there's going to be less opportunities for him, where he's going to have to try to force his way of being this quote unquote, pass first point guard. I kind of feel like that could, not only hinder his development, but also in a way hinder his long-term fit with this team. And this is what Coach J.B. Bickerstaff had to say about Chaz Lanier going into Monday's game and how he has looked so far throughout training camp.
He's taken it all in, and I think he's learned on the fly quickly. You watch his natural instincts offensively, and he's unbelievable at reading the game. Like, he knows spacing on the floor. He knows when to cut. Like I've told our staff, there's going to come a point in time in his career where he has 30 points and he's only dribbled the ball 4 times. Like, he's got that type of off-ball feel and awareness and ability to shoot the ball.
Once again, I'm not saying that Chaz is going to force the Pistons to choose between him or Marcus Sasser for this upcoming season. I'm not even saying that he's going to change the dynamic of the makeup of this team right now. I'm not expecting Chaz to have a big role with this team for this season, especially early on. And look, I truly do believe that Marcus Sasser really has an opportunity to carve out a rotational spot for his own. However, I just believe that if Chaz can be, once again, that off-ball scoring guard, that could change the dynamic for Marcus Sasser and his long-term fit with the team. especially after last night's game where he looked very well.
Yeah, it's crazy you say that, Coty, because I agree 100%. And I was gonna say, like, maybe you should chill just a little bit talking about Marcus Sasser, just
No, that's
because
my guy. That's my guy. You
he
know, we both
was.
from the H.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. He's from the University of Houston, and I was gonna ask, did you get a chance to watch his development? And you had said
Oh yeah.
that. So I thought Chaz looked really good. He had 11 points in 18 minutes. And what I just think is that he can be part of the rotation right away. He can be, maybe that the last man in the rotation, just because he can play with any lineup. He's very interchangeable just because the shooting he brings, especially if he plays with guys like Ron Holland, Asar, who are still developing their shot. He, along with like Duncan Robinson, bring that shooting element to it and don't need the ball in their hands a whole lot. But the thing I thought that was most interesting was that they played him with the starters. So he wasn't in the second unit to begin the first quarter, but as soon as I think it was a couple minutes left in the first, they played him with guys like Cade and then Asar, and he just looked like he fit in right away. And I think that speaks to his age, because even though he does have this rookie status, he is 23, which is older than Jalen Duren, Asar, Ron Holland. He's the same age as Ivy and only 1 year younger than Cade and Stewart. So he still fits this core. And I think he's just a shot maker, even though his form does look a little weird. I think the broadcast pointed that out. But it goes in, and, I think he got more comfortable like late in the game when they were playing a lot of, players like fringe role players, fringe bench players, team players that are looking to make the team. We seen that he was also able to create his own shot, not just fitting into a role of just catch and shoot. So I think that is something I'm going to look to, not just moving forward, but for this year. And why you talked about a lot about Marcus Sasser and how Chaz Lanier and Marcus Sasser, they might be competing for a role in the future. I think that can really start this year, just because, we talked a lot about the early in the show, Asar playing that point guard role. So if you can move Asar and stagger Asar, Ivy, maybe even Levert, and get those the ball handling responsibilities, you probably can play Lanier with these guys rather than just relying on Sasser as a backup point guard, even though he did get the first minutes off the bench. But the thing that really just stood out to me about Marcus Sasser is not only his lack of size, it's also his lack of ball handling. I think once he got pressured, you can see that I think he's less assertive in some ways, like just when he's getting pressured at full court and he's ready to pass the ball to someone else. So I think the only way that Marcus Sasser can, get consistent minutes and maybe get a contract movements forward is if he does play maybe like a Deuce McBride kind of role, like just that catch and shoot, play full court defense. But I think that's asking a lot just because of how small he is and his lack of ball handling. So I agree with you, Coty, that this is going to be something to watch moving forward, especially this year.
One thing I do want to note really quick before moving on, you mentioned Chaz Lanier got like a unorthodox shot. Maybe I should have developed an unorthodox shot, because if you think about it, outside of Clay and Steph, of course, all of the all-time greatest shooters, Reggie Miller, Ray Allen to a certain extent, all of those guys have somewhat of an unorthodox shot. Remember Michael Redd in Milwaukee, who was in my opinion second best Milwaukee, but third best Milwaukee. Giannis came along. The first was of course Kareem and Oscar Robertson, but that's neither here or there. But all of those guys had unorthodox shots, and it worked. All time great work. So maybe that's something I should have looked into trying to develop my skills and go to the NBA. But I want to conclude this latest installment of the Detroit News Basketball Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Pistons beat writer at the Detroit News, Coty M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on all your social media platforms at Coty Davis _24. Once again, it's Coty COTY DAVIS _24.
And thanks again for having me, Coty. And make sure you guys follow me at Tarohn Finley, TAROHNFINLEY.
Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.